All right, so in this video, I'm gonna keep going into more interval identification and some interval construction. So let's just get right into it. In the last video, I talked about the circle of fifths and how you could use that in finding ways to use the key signature method into finding how to identify intervals. So we're gonna continue using that method. So immediately before I begin, I'm just gonna write out FC, or that's a G, my bad. F, C, G, D, A, E, B. And I'm going to add F sharp and C sharp on the end. And I guess I didn't mention this, but the reason why is because if you were to continue this pattern with starting on F, going to B, this pattern would keep going. However, we draw the line here because C sharp has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sharps in the key signature, and any more than that gets into keys that technically do not exist. So we're just cutting it off there. Same thing with going backwards. We're starting on B, but since we're going to the left, we're going to add flats. B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, G flat, and C flat. And the same reason over here is why I'm not putting F flat, because that technically does not exist in the kind of music theory we're doing. Anyway, so for this first example, we have C going to D flat. All right, so one way to figure this out, when you're dealing with the second interval, which is just 1, 2, C to D, you can do one of two things. You could use the key signature method, or because it's a second, it would usually be a half step or a whole step of some kind. So if we look from C to D flat, if you had like even a keyboard or something, you'd recognize that C to D flat is a half step, and or from C to D flat up here. There's no notes in between these two notes. So a half step would usually be considered a minor second because there are no notes in between. But let's say you were going to use the key signature method to figure this one out as well. So if we're starting on C in our line, which has no flats, no sharps, we know that all the notes in this key signature are natural. So if we have a flat, that means it's either something that's not a major interval. So to figure this out, if you're going from D natural, C to D natural, which is a major second, to lower a natural note by 1/2 step, you put a flat next to it. Oh, we know this note's been lowered by a half step. Therefore, this is a minor second. All right, so for the next one, we're going from E to A sharp. Okay, that's odd. So let's figure out the size first. E, F, G, A. This is some kind of fourth. All right, so wait, could this be a perfect fourth? Let's find out. Because if we were to go to the left on this line, we'd be going in perfect fourths. And if we were to go to the right, we'd be going in perfect fifths. So let's start on E and go backwards to see if this is a perfect fourth. We're going from E to A natural. Oh, so this isn't a perfect fourth because we're dealing with A sharp. Okay, so how is E to A a perfect fourth, but E to A sharp isn't? They've stretched out the distance between these two notes by making the A 1/2 step higher. So since this is A sharp and E, we know that A sharp's not in the key signature of E. We know that it's not a perfect fourth away from E, and they've raised the A natural up by 1/2 step. So this would have to be an augmented fourth. All right, for the next one, since we're dealing with a descending interval, we're gonna start on the bottom note. We have G flat going to D natural. Okay, so this is where it gets tricky because they're really Well, there is such thing as D flat or G flat major. I lied. Let's figure out how many flats are in this key signature and what are those flats. So we're starting on C, no sharps, no flats. Going to F, 1 flat, B flat 2, E flat 3, A flat 4, D flat 5. G flat has 6 flats in the key signature. Okay, so the next part is to figure out what notes in that key signature are the flat notes. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna skip one ahead. So C flat is the last flat in the key of G flat major. So this means C flat and every note behind it is flat. When we stop here before F. So B flat is the first flat and C flat is the last flat. So we see G flat and D natural over here, but D flat is in the key of G flat major. So we know that they changed this D flat in some way. It's become D natural, so that means they've raised it up a half step. So let's first figure out the size. D, E, F, or G, A, B, C, D. Some sort of fifth. How do we figure out what kind of fifth this is? The first thing that we did was look and find the key signature, and we've determined that they have raised this up by a half step. So if you also look on your line of fifths, going from G flat to D flat is a perfect fifth. So if you were to raise a perfect fifth by a half step, you'd end up with an augmented fifth. All right, so the next one, we're starting on F, and we're going to the note D flat. All right, let's just start by figuring out the size. F, G, A, B, C, D. It's gonna be some sort of sixth. So let's use the key signature method again to figure this one out. So if we're starting on C and we're going to F, we're gonna go 1 to the left, which means this key signature has 1 flat. And if we go 1 more to the left, we find that B flat is the last flat and the only flat in this key signature. So that means all other notes in the key of F besides B should be natural notes. So this note is D flat. However, we just said all natural notes besides B should be natural. Or all other notes besides B should be natural in the key of F. So that means they've lowered this note by a half step. So how do we figure out what kind of interval this is? Well, we just say if it's been lowered by a half step by its major equivalent, it would have to be a minor interval. But what if we took it one step further now and we turn this note into D double flat? Okay, so we're adding a new layer to this. So we're starting on F and now we're going to D double flat. So we already know that this is some sort of sixth, and that in the key of F, D should be D natural. So this means they've lowered this twice. And if we know from going on our little spectrum of interval quality, we have major right here, going to minor, and then diminished if you were to lower this once and then lower this twice. And this is if you were to raise it up. Going augmented is if you were to raise it up from major once. So they've lowered this note twice, therefore it has to be a diminished sixth. All right, moving on to the bottom row. If you'd like to pause the video and do this on your own, that's awesome, but I'm gonna go ahead and keep explaining these. So for this one, we always start with the bottom note for descending intervals like this. We're going from A flat to D. So another way to, if you don't like viewing the intervals descending like this, you could take the lowest note and move it up an octave higher. So now you're going from D to A flat, and then you'd have to invert the interval, which we talked about briefly, but that I can also explain later. But for now, we're just going to go from A flat to D. So the first step is figuring out the key signature of A flat major. So we're starting on C. We're gonna go to the left. So we have 1 flat, 2 flat, 3 flats, and 4 flats. And now we're gonna figure out our last flat by going one more step, and this is our last flat. D flat is the last flat in the key of A flat, and we're gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4, and D, A, E, and B flat are all of our flats in the key of A flat major. So we just said that D should be D flat in this key signature. So since this is D natural, it means they've raised it up a half step. So this might be something different. We're gonna figure out the size real quick. So A, B, C, D, it is some kind of fourth. And because they've raised this up a half step from what is in the key signature, this means it can't be a perfect fourth. We could also check this over here. If you were to go this way in the line of fifths and fourths to the left, you'd be going in the interval of a perfect fourth. A flat to D flat is a perfect fourth. But here we have A flat to D natural, which means they have raised this fourth in some way, therefore it is an augmented fourth. With perfect intervals, you can't have major or minor fourths or fifths, or octaves, or unison. You can only have perfect, diminished, and augmented. All right, so moving on, we're going from F to E sharp. So you might already be thinking, but these notes have the exact same pitch. Wouldn't this be a perfect octave? And the answer would be no, because if it were a perfect octave, you'd be going from F to another F, not to E sharp. E sharp is something different. So let's check our size. We've got F, G, A, B, C, D, E. This is some kind of seventh. But how do we figure out what kind of seventh this is? We know from earlier that there's only one flat in the key signature of F, and it's B flat, so all other notes should be natural. So in the key of F, we have an E natural, but they have taken this E natural and raised it up a half step to be E sharp. Therefore, this has to be an augmented interval. This has to be an augmented seventh. Because you're going from major, you're raising it up a half step, it becomes augmented. All right, we're going from C to E sharp over here. If we know the key signature of C, which is no sharps, no flats, everything's natural, they have altered this E by raising it up one half step. So let's check the size, C, D, E, some kind of third. If we're going from a natural note to a sharp note, they have raised it by a half step. And if E is natural in the key of C major, a major third from C to some sort of E would be to E natural, but they've raised it to E sharp. Therefore, this is an augmented third. A lot of augmented intervals. I didn't do that on purpose. All right, the last one's a bit confusing, but this is just to be aware of because this kind of interval does exist. So we're going from G to another G, but it's G sharp. This would be some kind of octave, and octaves are perfect intervals. Going from G to G sharp, this wouldn't be a perfect octave because this note's been altered. It's not the same pitch as this one. So we have raised G up by a half step over here. Therefore, this is an augmented octave, which you don't see much about augmented or diminished octaves at all, but I have no idea what the book might tell you. But this is it on weird intervals and